Hello, everyone. 100 billion euro. That's the estimated damage that tax evasion causes each year. Each year, that's 270 million euro per day, 11 million euro per hour. And while I'm telling you all this, 100,000 euro disappeared. Just because cum-ex and cum-cum, so-called tax trade that I was working on for years, billions in damages was called. And that is not classical share trade, but trades that's commissioned to just make money via tax effects, because you're either paying less tax, that's called cum-cum, or you get taxes back that you never paid, that's called cum-ex. Cum-ex, it's estimated 10 billion euro damage were caused. Cum-cum, almost thrice that number. It's estimated that 28.5 billion euro in damages. And that's careful estimates. And all that's money that we are losing each year, we could really use. The last government in Germany broke because of money issues. And the new government has the same troubles, more or less. So we need money everywhere for education, for infrastructure, and for cohesion in our society. And with additional 100 billion euro each year, each of us would be better off. So we could think that there's a big political interest to end this theft. But reality looks different, unfortunately. If we check whether we are doing anything that people just grab into our coffers, the answer is, well, not really. And this is a sentence that people like to quote me with, and that's really fitting. The small ones you catch, the big ones you throw back. And that's not just because of my personal experiences, but also the science of criminality agrees. So clearing up and catching the criminals is difficult. Many of those cases are stopped. Only every 20th case comes before the court. And it's a difficult finding, and it's a show of asymmetry between the security agencies and the banks, basically. So economical criminality harms all of us, and in many ways. So first, there is enormous damages to our coffers. So 100 billion euro each year in our state coffers. That could change a lot. Secondly, it damages economy as a whole, because criminals, with their criminal methods, they get advantages, and suddenly they can lower prices, for example, by not paying income tax for their workers. So if one company does never pay taxes, they can make cheaper offers than honest companies. And if the state does not look closely here, then the honest companies are punished. And if the state is not going consequently against tax evasion, just as social criminals, then obviously there is not an equal handling of the issues. And of course, that leads to people not wanting to pay taxes anymore. Because if not all play by the same rules, then moral is sinking. But why don't we look closely into these crimes? It's mostly because of the enormous political pressure of the finance lobby, so banks and their lobbyists. We are often called a nation of automobiles, so personally I thought the car lobby would be the strongest one in Germany, but it's far behind the finance lobby. In Germany, there is a lobby registry for 3 years now. And every year we are looking into this and analyzing it, and we can obviously see that the finance lobby is at the top every year. And this year as well, 10 of the 100 strongest entries are done by banks and similar finance companies. They pay around 40 billion euro each year, and that's more than car and chemistry lobby together. So it's almost 10 lobbyists per each Minister of Finance. And they know exactly what stories to tell to push their own interests. And their stories, they're not only told to the politicians, the narratives are also put into the media for the public. I brought a few examples, again in the context of CumEx. Again, it's an illegal thing costing us about 10 billion euro. 2017, in the media, said it's a gap in the law. It was a gray area. What does that wording suggest? Well, if there's a gap, you can use it. If there's a loophole, then the lawmakers are at fault. So it's bad laws.
Now we're reading one from a Frankfurt newspaper. It was talking about the tax law, something that I, as a DA, heard a lot. Apparently common sense plays a big role in the tax law, and obviously you cannot get deductions for taxes you haven't paid before, and that should not be titulated as the thinking of simple-minded people. So what they were saying, that people who are not tax law experts should keep out of discussion, and they're trying to gatekeep here. And this is an article where one of the perpetrators was interviewed himself. He said that he's the victim of a conspiracy theory, and that the state is trying to badmouth him. And similarly, it is for the other narratives for CumEx. There's a gap in the tax law, criminalization by the state, victimization. All of the courts in the land have ruled that this was illegal, but it's in stark contrast to the newspaper articles that were written about it. There were actually a few people who were put into jail over this, and it's clear that these newspaper articles were not just coincidental, but that they were part of a PR campaign. And as you can see in this quote, lawsuits are no longer tried exclusively in the courtroom. Today they are also tried in the court of public opinion, because people can be influenced. That also holds true for the judges and the DAs. And I'm still happy that the person here was jailed over the offenses, and it really shows that everybody is responsible for their own critical thinking about issues like these. And we need to talk about the methods of strategic communication. They have 3 methods usually. They're saying that usually try to minimize the issue and in its importance. They're basically saying it's a gap in the tax law. It's not a big deal. And when they actually the police looked into it, they found that there's actually a whole industry of people working towards this. The second issue is artificial complexification. That serves this narrative of this is hyper complex. You simple minds cannot understand this. Keep out of this. And then there is this strategy of trying to reverse the victim and the perpetrator. They try to have the criminals seem like the victims of the state. Who are the people behind this issue, though? So, white-collar criminals are suspiciously inconspicuous. They're usually not exceptional in any way. They have a very average CV. They're mostly male. They usually start a little late. They have quite a good education and have a fairly good career, and they're definitely not part of the less privileged parts of society. That's also, they don't have any existential needs not taken care of. That's why they're called white-collar criminals. This is a scene from the current documentation by the German television about this topic. They're discussing the fact that one of their colleagues, these are law enforcement personnel, they're saying why one of their colleagues was eating okapi. And they're complaining that these people have no sense of right and wrong. And this is definitely something that is very common for these type of criminals. They usually don't see the problem themselves. They don't try to find their own responsibility, but rather they see themselves as a victim and they see that the problem is with the state or someone else. So there's also the degree of emotionality or the emotional impact of a narrative doesn't give you any indication of if it's right or wrong. And something surprising that people with this kind of background that we just discussed can still become criminals, because this is not what you usually think of. And there's one main factor that science tells us is involved. The person needs a reasoning for himself in order to keep telling himself that he's the good guy and that his acts are legal and okay, and that works out quite well in practice. So much about the perpetrators. Now let's look at the government and the law enforcement agencies, the tax office, all of the legal part. And we're a little, our personal, all of these government agencies are very low in personnel, and especially also in their education. We clearly don't have enough capable people that work. For example, the Cologne DA could not raid any bank plainly because we didn't have enough people that could do it. And 2021 was the first year where we had enough people where we could do that, and we did about one bank a month with more than 100 people each time. So you can clearly see the amount of effort that is involved there. And so if you don't have enough people, then you can't raid a bank, in the legal sense, obviously. Also, we have a lack in education and training, especially close to your job. You're not being trained in the things that you really need during your training, and all of it is more or less on-the-job training. So then it's all the more stark that these trainings that happen while you're already working are also very scarce, and that makes it very hard to have enough people who are qualified enough. Then we also have the issue that there's a lot of fluctuation in the personnel, and for a lot of people working in the in government offices, it's important to rotate through many different offices, and this is by design, just so they have a lot of breadth, but it also prevents that people gain the depth that are needed in the knowledge that they need for their actual role. And just to go back to the concrete example of our own investigation, it took about 2 years to get the people skilled enough in order to understand all the tricks that these people are using, in order to understand the jargon of the stock brokers, and to understand all of this. But unfortunately, after 2 years, most of these people have been rotated out already. Also, the equipment is really old and very low level of digitalization. I needed to write 280 forms, fill them in, or write them up myself. It was about 250 pages. And I, as a normal DA, only had a normal printer that can do about 5 pages per minute, and we didn't have any other printer, and we didn't have a network with printers. So it basically took too long. It's ridiculous. So the only thing I could do is that I asked another agency that had exactly one printer that was capable enough that I basically sat in a cubicle for 2 weeks and just did printing. And you see how much effort is involved in these kind of investigations. And once I had some colleagues that I took onto a raid into a bank that was in the early times of cum-ex, where we didn't have a lot of personnel, and we needed to back up the network drive. And then I was told by our techies, yeah, we don't have enough space to save that. And we told them, look, guys, here's the evidence, but we cannot back it up. How is that going to work? And the only solution we found was we asked another office again, another government agency that had the capabilities. But if that hadn't worked, then we would have just gone empty-handed. And we also couldn't have online meetings. We didn't even have meeting software. So I needed to ask other people to use their computers in order to have an online meeting. You see how deficient the equipment is that these people have. Something else that impedes the investigations is the data privacy confusion. Every single agency has their own GDPR officer, and I had to work with a lot of different agencies in different states, different tax evasion investigators. They all had different rules and regulations. One of them were allowed or only allowed to send stuff encrypted. The other one was not allowed to receive it or not use it at all. Then some people in Bavaria, for example, when we tried to have a video conference, even at the point where we had a system, they all had different regulations. One of them was only allowed to use Skype. One of them was disallowed to use Skype. And then there was another one who was only allowed to use Teams. So these are all these basics. And these agencies cannot communicate at all. How are they supposed to do efficient work? So this is one of these disadvantages of the federal structure in Germany. And there is also no culture of collaboration. They are allowed to exchange information and work together, but it usually doesn't work that way in practice. There's this whole culture of being your own silo, don't leak any information, don't cause any trouble. I was very young when I was taught this, when I was a very young DA in Cologne, and we had an issue and no one could solve it. And I actually dared to ask the DAs in Düsseldorf, which is another city close by, and I got into a lot of trouble because of that. It was more important to not leak or give the indication of any issues rather than solve them. And this is also something that was criticized by the NGO of the taxpayers. So there are also issues in trying to get collaboration across countries, so not just the state, but other nations, because you need to ask them to do any kind of investigation on their own turf, and they're usually not very happy because they're also overworked, and that's why it also takes very long. In 2014, we requested this with some countries, and it took us about 10 years to get the results from that. And clearly, this kind of crime in the financial sector doesn't respect national borders, obviously. This is an international problem. And it is a great impediment if other nations stall this kind of investigation. And it's also a problem that most of these companies don't actually have any paper, and they keep their data on servers, but these are not in Germany. So they're in the Netherlands, they're in the UK. And if you want to raid this company and try to find the evidence and search through it, then there's nothing you can actually get your hand on, because there's nothing within your borders, and you need to have the cooperation of the other countries. And this can take years and years. And then you have a problem with statistics, because for trying to solve very complex issues or crimes, obviously that takes a lot of time. And the problem is that in statistics, for example, for trying to figure out how much personnel an agency needs, these very long times that it takes to solve these crimes are not visible in that statistics. So you get less personnel for all of that time that you're spending here. And that's why government agencies are not really interested in solving these, because they don't get any credit for it, essentially. And that gives the wrong incentives towards having very small, simple issues that you can actually solve and that show up in the statistics. And on the other hand, most of these perpetrators are organized much better than we are. Clearly, I mean, they have a lot of money. They can afford very expensive lawyers with a lot of resources, and they're just doing their job, and they're creating a lot of issues. They are complaining with the relevant authorities. They have marketing campaigns. They're talking to politicians, and this is already an issue because these government agencies working the way they do already, this really is an easy way to stall us. And I'm asked I'm asked very often if I'm losing hope or not, but that's actually not the case at all. You can change these things, you just have to want it.
And that you can do something against economical crimes, that these crimes can be solved. That's what Cologne shows. We had no ideal opportunities, as I could show, and we were no experts, but we tried and we grew into it. And then we fought for our first cum-ex judgment. And it was suggested by many courts that we are correct, and many politicians, especially finance ministry. So cum is opposing to cum-ex still at the beginning. Just 1% of those 28.5 billion euro could be clawed back. So a lot to do, and now is the time to do it. So what can we do against economical crime? First, we can make it more risky. Because if people try to do it, it counts how risky is it. So we have to make the agencies stronger. All those problems that I showed have to be changed. We need more people, better cooperation, better equipment, better infrastructure. All those issues are solvable. But we can also do things on other layers, individual layers, because the values are important here. With a solid value framework, you are protected against those risks of becoming a criminal. If you don't have those values, these frameworks, then, well, low risk, high reward, then you just grab it. So a solid value canon protects against economical crime. And we could also think about involving ethics more in the education. Well, and also the societal reaction plays a role, especially well-integrated economical white-collar criminals. Social acceptance is important to them. Human behavior can be directed. If white-collar crime is not accepted but stigmatized, then we can assume that people will change their thinking and their behavior. That's what science tells us. And there's a lot of room to improve because white-collar crime looks like a gentleman's crime, despite the damages. So what can we do, each one of us, as a society? We can, outside of elections, participate by helping NGOs. NGOs are building a counterweight to lobbyists, and they focus on the public interest. And that this works, and politicians are not deaf, can be seen with Lars Klingbeil, because he, when asked, showed that he sees the public interest and said he promised to fight tax evasion crime. And we will, of course, check on him because we are a counterweight for the finance lobby. We fight against misleading narratives of the finance sector. And we change something with you and for you because finance politics it affects all of us. And we want to talk publicly and transparently, not in some backrooms. So please follow our newsletter, subscribe to our newsletter, and follow us on social media. Thanks. Thank you very, very much. That's your applause. Thank you. We can sit down for a few questions if you like. Thank you. Thanks also to all of you and to you that we handled this break so well. I still have my convenient shoes on. I had no opportunity to change. So many politicians, I don't even have to mention them, I think, they skirm out of responsibility and said they are not supposed to be involved. So as a finance senator, during one of the biggest scandals we know in Germany, one of the biggest economical scandals, isn't it their job to get involved? Isn't it their responsibility? No, you got it in one. So finance ministers or senators in city-states, they are the highest bosses of administration. It is their responsibility for what happens in their administrations. So it's not that they are not allowed to be involved. So of course they have to follow the law to have different reasonings. It has to be based on the law, of course, but it's their responsibility that everything works right. And I think it's quite interesting that it's not obvious to all of us, because ministers of the interior, if something goes wrong, if there's a protest, if there's too much violence, the minister of the interior, they are blamed and get uncomfortable questions. But economy is handled differently. And why? Well, they themselves probably don't want to correct us in our misassumptions, that it's their fault if things go wrong. And I don't know how we forgot and why we forgot, because in the other ministries it's very conscious. Everyone's really conscious about it. But also in the public discussion, finance ministries, they are not really bothered if something goes wrong in their domain. And no one's asking, well, what are you doing against it? How do you learn from your mistakes? That question is almost never asked. Is it maybe because we think it's too complex as a public, as a society? Well, I don't understand it anyway, so let's not ask. But other things of matters of the interior maybe seem more understandable? Well, that's probably part of it. Economical topics, well, I already mentioned the narrative. It's so complicated. It's not for normal people. But it's about our money. It's the basis of our state, and we should be able to discuss it. And we can also just demand that it's discussed in a way that the public is enabled to discuss it. So there's also a lot of room for improvement. And certainly journalists are only human, so they're intimidated as well because it's supposed to be really complex. But I think that we also forgot how it's all built up. And of course, it's a complex word that I use here. But what it means is that the minister is the boss, and it's not just a politician. They have political responsibilities, but they're also the boss of their ministry, of their administration. What can journalists maybe do better? Also about informing the public or reducing the complexity, or are there other ways of handling this and not being misled? Well, I think the journalists, of course, they try to get their own opinion, but it's not that simple to reduce the narratives of the lobbies because they have a lot of resources. They invest a lot into this. We could almost say manipulating us. And because it's also a lot of jargon and a lot of specific topics, it's difficult. So it's important that we have a counterweight. And when it comes to the environment or other societal topics, we have that. But before we founded Finanzwende, there was no counterweight from the public, from the civilian public. And I think it's important because especially where these narratives are so strong, we have to fight them. And journalists will profit from this because I don't think that they are actively trying to mislead us. They are not just listening to one side. There's just no one on the other side talking to them. So a counterweight, you already mentioned Finanzwende, which is the name of this organization. What else could we do, we as a society and also affected? How could we band together? Well, banding together, that's the right point. That's a good way of putting it because there's lobby control, there's Tax Me Now, there's a network for tax justice. They all work on this. And you can support those. You can get informed. All of them, and just as us, have newsletters. So inform yourselves on what's happening. And I often get the impression that we try to stay away because it's so complex. And that's a way of the journalists who paint it complex. And what I noticed about CumX, that it was often tried to explain it. And every article started with a big block with a lot of complex terms where you try to follow what's happening. And then you got the idea, okay, I don't get it anyway. And you get frustrated and it takes away their will to get informed. And we have to overcome this. And we can overcome this because things can be explained easily and simply without explaining all those terms. So I think it's important to have those financial political topics. And it's possible to get informed and then also have an opinion and start discussing. And it's allowed to make your opinion public, and you can sign petitions. You can vote, of course. You can also call the people you voted for. So you're not as powerless as you might feel, especially since a lot of people try to make you feel weak and to have you draw back. Well, I have to say it works on me. So just reading this explainer block, it takes so much work that I'm not as motivated anymore. And maybe I'm just talking about me, but I have this trust, this deep trust in the state. So I always assumed that it would work out, and I know it's naive. And this trust is breaking away piece by piece. And I wonder, a healthy skepticism, how can we install that? Not just a general distrust in the state, but how can we learn to be more wakeful, to check on the powerful? Do you have any suggestions? Well, I think it always helps to think about how there is big money interests. So if people from that direction tell you something, they have their own interests, and that's legitimate. They are allowed to have their interests, but you just, from normal human thoughts, you should realize that they have their interests, and the explanations are maybe biased, but there are options to get informed. There are NGOs, and especially about cum-ex, there are many journalists who work on this for years, and they explain it quite well. But this aspect, that these explanations, I focus on this because I noticed it, and with this scandal, they didn't try it. No one of us understands completely how this tax evasion software was working, and you don't have to understand it. You just need to know it's manipulated. And with the tax trades, the same. It just works by them getting money from our tax coffers. Period. So how or why were we pushed into trying to understand it exactly? Well, probably because we want to do it right. Yeah, probably. So it's insecurity. And so those lobbyists, they played on that, and they said, you didn't study the tax law, and you have a simplified view, so it's oversimplified what you think. So to always remembering that they have their own interests, that's important. But also, you should feel more empowered. And I myself feel with this, because I never studied tax law. I was more interested in digital politics, but then I was just put in this position, and I had to work with this. And in the beginning, I thought, oh, well, can I even do this? I never studied economy or economics and tax law. So I didn't believe in myself in the beginning, but I knew that I had to. And then I started working on it, and I learned it's not that difficult. So those narratives and these images, they can also keep you down, and they can make you hesitant. Yeah, that gives me hope, especially if you say that you had to grow into it. I believe what would also help, if I understand you correctly, is to communicate differently. And what helps me in such things, what's the biggest misunderstanding? Or what is the biggest point I don't get? And cum-ex, what is the biggest misconcept? Well, the loophole. It's like a main plot point. I read it again. It really got burnt in on anyone. So that was a real great success of the communication manipulation. And I get often asked, how would the laws need to be changed to end this? And many politicians think the same. I make a law and then it doesn't exist anymore. But the issue is that it was never a law trouble. There was never a loophole. The courts found this as well. And criminals just don't follow the law. So to steal in a market or in a store is illegal for many, many centuries, but still it happens. So this idea that I could make a law and then it ends, it stops, So in 2012, there was a new law, and then it was supposed to stop. But no, they just changed their behavior a bit. So it's an issue of control, just like all crime. Just petty theft. If you don't have any cameras in the dark corners of your store, then that's where people will steal. And it's the same in white-collar crime. So that's a bad misunderstanding because politicians fall for it as well. And they just wonder, how can I change the laws? But it's the administration that controls the laws. And if the administration is not set up correctly, then you can make laws as much as you like. You can never stop the crime. Well, a better final word I could not have imagined. Thank you very, very much, Anne, for this whole talk, for this Q&A, and again, for this special situation that we find ourselves in today. I think it never happened before. I can learn from you because I ran immediately. You shouldn't do, but you were much more secure. And again, a big round of applause. Thank you. This was the second day of Republica. I hope that you had a lot of fun. My highlights, there are so many. Sarah Bossetti, obviously this session right here. A big highlight, Maurice Höfgen, Heidi Reicheneck, so many. And tomorrow we will continue. It starts at 10. You can look forward to a lot of people. Grandmas Against Right, Thomas Lux, and a lot of great people. They will do a democracy speed dating in the evening. I'm really looking forward to it. Have a nice evening. We'll need the drink now. Thank you again.